we have in the Torah a hierarchy of values. People are placed on a value scale in relation to their spiritual potential. Well, how can one decide on a person's spiritual potential? We're not God to decide among people. God has laid down in the Torah. This can have a very practical application in our everyday lives. Halacha, that means the authoritative decisions of our tradition, laid down the law in matters of life and death. This might involve a question of life and death. If people are struggling in the river, there was a shipwreck. One can only save one at a time. Who is to be saved first? It might be a question in a hospital. There's only one dialysis machine. There are people with kidney complaints who will die unless they're attached to the machine. This is a moral issue in medicine which is much discussed at the present time. It's the tendency in our Western society to give precedence to the young, healthy individual, the productive person, in a material sense. The older person would have to take second place. If it's a question between rich and poor, probably the rich would take precedence. But in Torah ethics, decreed by the authority of halacha, the picture is quite different. The hierarchy of values is determined by the number of mitzvot which the Torah imposes upon that personality. Not the individual. We're not concerned here with an individual, but the potential which the Torah itself, which God himself has placed upon that person in those circumstances. For example, we have a division in the Jewish nation: Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. The priest, the Levite, the Israelite. What's the difference between them? The Kohen has additional commandments to perform. In the time of the temple, he is involved with the service in the temple in Jerusalem. He has mitzvahs, commandments to perform in connection with the people around him. He has to bless the people of Israel every day. In fact, in Jerusalem, in Israel, this portion of the temple service is performed daily. This is the one link we have with our glorious past of this temple in Jerusalem, not so far from where we're sitting now. That every day the priest is brought into contact with the general population and has to give them the blessing of the Torah. Here's additional mitzvot. The high priest, of course, has still greater functions to perform. After him comes the Levite, who has also commandments in connection with the sanctuary. Next to him comes the Israelite, who has 613 mitzvot. At least he has, apart from those which apply only to the priest and the Levite, and so on. Now the halacha determines that the person to be saved first is the person who has most mitzvot. Most commandments imposed upon him. Because this is his spiritual content, this is his spiritual value in the whole society of Torah life. But there's one overriding proviso. However lowly the status of the person may be, we have to consider whether he is learned in Torah or not. So the decision is, if there are two people struggling there for life, one a high priest with all the possible spiritual and religious functions that you can imagine, and next to him is struggling a lowly person with the lowest social and mitzvah stage. But the lowly one is learned in Torah and the high priest is not. Then it's the learned one who has to be saved before the high priest. We see the value attached in Torah life to learning, and not purely a question of knowledge, obviously, but because that learning makes him and gives him a greater spiritual potential. He is the one who will influence the people around him. Now we come to the question of a society based on Torah. How does Torah solve the problems of a just society? The secret is the perfected personality of the Torah sage, who is at the center of a Torah society. Now, let's have a blackboard and we'll see what this looks like. Right. Thank you, thank you. Let us compare, let us have a look at a society. Let's take a graph of a society. The split up of a society. Let's take here an absolute moral scale, starting from 0 and ending at 100, and along this scale we have the types of activity engaged in this society from a moral perspective. Say we have here at this bottom range, we have here people who are engaged in crimes of the most atrocious cruelty. Again, we go up to gang warfare, drug pushing and murder on license and all these terrible things, cruelty among people, butchering and so on and so forth. Then we go on to crimes of robbery with violence and robbery without violence and so on. People are engaged in all these activities in most societies. Then we go on to people who only swindle in certain circumstances in business, and then people who only swindle the income tax reform and so on. There are different morals. People engaged in better types of activity, educational activities, beneficial activities and so on, until we come to the top level, thinkers, saints. So every society has its people who are spiritually inclined. So here we have an absolute scale of moral values, behavior according to. And here we have percentage of population engaged in these activities. Population percentage. Right, so presumably we'll have a normal parabola which goes something like that. In other words, there are very few people. There are a few people engaged in the worst, horrible activities, more engaged in the normal balance of moral activity, a bit worse, a bit better. And at the top, you have very few who are on the higher level. Let us say that here, this is the dividing line between crimes of terrible violence and murder and crimes of a non-violent sort. This is a normal society which you'll get in most places in the world. This is, from here, we have crimes of cruelty. From here to here. Now let us look at a Torah society as it has been established and known in our times in communal communities of the Eastern Europe and other places in the Torah world. Although we didn't have an autonomy, we were living in a diaspora, in an exile, but within our communities we had a certain degree of autonomy. One felt the unity and integrity of a community. Now, the parabola in a Torah society was rather different. It was something like that, you see. In other words, the parabola started after crimes of cruelty. We did not experience in our societies gang warfare, murder for money, murder, cruelty between man and man. That didn't exist. It was beyond our capabilities. Now, what was the secret of it? Shall we assume that there were certain genes in the Jewish nature which prevented them from cruelty? No. It's been shown that it isn't true. Jews are capable of crimes as well as any other member of the human race. The secret was Torah sociology. There was, what changed the situation was at the top, pulling the whole community over into the higher ranges of behavior, was the Torah sage.